Good afternoon. I'm Reverend Dave Thompson, and I'm excited to bring you back to our Civil Human Bible study today. We're continuing in the book of Matthew, and I'm a civil human minister, and so what that means is that I'm focusing my ministry and my attention to building human peace and common ground. And in that effort, I'm looking at my own spiritual heritage to try to look at Jesus' teachings and find those universal teachings that I feel are applicable across the board to all people, regardless of our different faiths, our different politics, or different lifestyle. So join me if you will. We're reading in Matthew chapter 22, verses 1 through 14. Starting in verse 1. And Jesus answered and spoke to them again in parables and said, "The kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who arranged a marriage for his son, and sent out his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding, and they were not willing to come. Again he sent out other servants, saying, 'Tell those who were invited, see, I have prepared dinner, my oxen and fatted cattle are killed, and all things are ready, come to the wedding.' But they made light of it, and went their ways, one to his own farm, another to his business. And the rest seized his servants, treating them spitefully, and killed them. But when the king heard about this, he was furious, and he sent out his armies, destroyed the murderers, and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, 'The wedding is ready, but those who are inviting were not worthy. Therefore go into the highways, and as many as you find, invite to the wedding.' So the servants went out into the highways and gathered together all who they found, both good and bad, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he saw a man there who did not have on a wedding garment. So he said to him, 'Friend, how did you come in here without a wedding garment?' And he was speechless. Then the king said to the servants, 'Bind him hand and foot, take him away and cast him into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are called, but few are chosen.'" So I want to set up a little bit about what's going on right now and why Jesus is telling this parable at this particular moment. So Jesus is in the temple. This is Passover, which is a huge holiday where hundreds of thousands of pilgrims come to Jerusalem, the capital city, to go to the temple, to offer sacrifices, to pay the payments that they owe, to be taught by the rabbis and the teachers who are there. It's a significant holiday in the Jewish life and history. And Jesus right now is actually sitting in the temple. So he's, just talking to people. He's been healing people. He's been providing teaching. And today we're continuing in a situation where the religious leaders of Jesus' day have come at him yet again, and they're trying to attack him. And the reason for that is because they don't like Jesus. Not only did Jesus completely disrupt the commerce of the temple on one of the most significant days of income for the temple and for the religious priests, but he sidesteps all of them. He sidesteps all the formality and all of the pomp and circumstance of the religious leaders and goes directly to the people who are hurting and heals them and provides messages of hope to them to help them to turn their lives around. Jesus is, of course, making a point of the fact that, look, this is what you're supposed to do, religious leaders. This is your job, but you're not doing it. All you're doing is making a killing off of all these people. So now he's sharing a parable. And you may recall we talked about this. A parable is basically just a story. It's an allegory to basically give some context for Jesus to give a message without attacking people directly. So I want to walk through this particular story because there's a lot packed in here that Jesus is saying to his religious leaders of that day, 2,000 years ago. And they would have been highly offended. People would have been very uncomfortable sitting in the audience, not knowing whether they should laugh because he's just burned the Pharisees and the chief priests, or if they should run away because now they're going to call the temple guards and arrest Jesus. It's very high tension right now. And so Jesus is sharing this story. He talks about a king and compares the kingdom of heaven basically the society of the universe, a good society, that there's a king. And the king has arranged a marriage for his son, and he's put out a huge banquet. And we talked, a number of weeks ago, actually, about marriage banquets. And this is one of the most important times in a family's life when they marry off their children. And it really is one of the only times when family and friends come together and where there's a significant celebration or ceremony. So this is a big deal. And so he sends his servants out to go and to collect all the people who've been invited, right? Their wedding list. And, the ones who RSVP'd or are supposed to come, the ones that they planned all the food for. And so the servants go out there, they call all the people who are supposed to come. None of them cared. They could care less, which is highly offensive in this society because it's one of the few big events in a person's life. To not go is a huge offense. And Jesus is making a point of this. So he even asks the servants, this king, to go out again and tell them, hey, I really put a big show on. There's going to be, I've got the oxen and I've got the fatted calves and everything's been prepped and butchered and ready to eat. It sounds pretty morose, but really that's the way that we eat meat even today. I'll tell a quick story about this time that I was in a traveling band in college. We were staying with host families during the summer. And so I think I was at this particular junction. It was a church that I was at singing and then speaking at. And I was with a couple of gals from the college that I was attending. And this was in North Dakota. So we drove out to the middle of nowhere. And there's a lot of that around North Dakota. And I mean, you couldn't see civilization or houses or even trees as far as the eye could see in either direction. And it's in the winter. So we get to this house. Lovely couple, really nice family. They really rolled out the red carpet for us. It's really wonderful to see that and to experience people in that sort of atmosphere. And as we were sitting down at the table, the wife brings out this big plate of roast beef, and we're salivating and excited about the fact it's going to taste delicious, and it does. It's the most amazing beef that we've had for a long time. And one of the girls said, "That is just the best roast beef I've ever had." And the father, just without even thinking, blurts out, "Well, of course it is. We just slaughtered him last night." And you could see this girl's face drop into the fairest shades of white that I could ever see. She almost lost it at the table, the poor thing. So anyway, the whole point of that story is to note that this is a big deal. And so when this king puts on a feast like that, he is putting forth the most expensive items that he can think of. And so when his servants go out again to invite the people who are supposed to come, who are on the wedding list, then they don't come at all. Again, not only do they ignore them, but one of them goes back to their own kingdom and just says, nah, whatever. Another one goes back to their business to go about the business of making money. And then the other ones actually grab the servants, mistreat them, and end up killing them. Now, I'm sure you can imagine, not only was it highly offensive, but they killed his servants. So the king, of course, rushes in and takes care of business. And then he says, okay, look, clearly the people that I have asked to be in this wedding are not going to come. I want to invite anybody who will come to come. And so he sends the servants out, and they go everywhere to all the different places that they can find people and welcome them in. The king shows up and says they welcome good and bad people. It didn't matter at that point. They were just putting the call out. So the king gets there and he says, hey, you over there, why aren't you dressed in a wedding gown, which is this traditional garb that you were supposed to do? And if you didn't, it was pretty offensive and meant that you were only there for the food. And so the king rightfully says, I'm sorry, this is the way, we're here to celebrate a wedding. And anyway, kicks the guy out. What in the world does this have to do with anything? Why is Jesus sharing this particular story to these religious leaders? There's a very specific set of reasons here. The first is that these individuals are supposed to be the best of the best of the best when it comes to faith, when it comes to practicing all the religious laws, when it comes to crossing their T's and dotting their I's in purity and being perfect as much as possible. These are the people who were good at it. It was just what their job was. And yet, they weren't doing a thing for the poor and for the suffering. So Jesus brings this message out to them. Look, basically, God is creating this whole new kingdom of heaven, right? This new way of thinking that I'm trying to introduce to you, and that several people before have tried to do, a new way of working together so that we have peace, we have common ground, that we have mercy and compassion, and can have happiness and prosperity in our society by following these basic virtues and rules. Now, in this story, you noticed, of course, there are a couple of times that king sends out his servants, the second time being the fact that they were killed. Jesus is very specifically, although in an allegory, he's bringing a point to them and to the people in the temple, saying to the chief priests, they killed the people who were trying to do good. That makes them look terrible. And specifically, he's talking about John the Baptist, which we've talked about earlier. That was one of Jesus's favorites, essentially. He started his ministry being baptized by John, and the king put him to death. And so Jesus is pointing out, look, you even kill the people who are coming to do good. And now, because you could care less about doing what's right, you're only concerned with, and we talked about the 3 reasons why the second time the people went to their own kingdom, which means Jesus is saying, look, you as leaders, you're not even in this society. You're not even following the rules that work. Then they go about the other ones for building their business, right? Making money. And clearly Jesus recently just threw out the money changers and turned over all of the commerce on one of the most strongest merchandising and cash flow days for them. And then he says the last one's mistreated and killed his servants, again pointing to John the Baptist. And so now you see this king and this story saying, you know what? The ones who are supposed to be the invited ones to the wedding feast, forget about it. They're not going to pay attention. So I'm going to go out and find somebody and fill up this wedding feast and share the goodness of what this kingdom is about, and to provide for them a way of living that is going to provide for them peace and goodness and happiness as much as possible in this life. And of course, Jesus is essentially saying, get ready, because all of this temple, all of the religious structure that you have created, it's all going to pass away, because it no longer solves any problems. It only creates them. I want to launch off of that particular statement. It's one of the more important aspects of this verse and this passage, because it really crosses over to us 2,000 years removed. We have a system right now, churches, religions, gathering places on the weekends, sing some songs, hear a sermon, go home and have some dinner. I truly believe that right now in our society, we need to hear these words more than ever. These words that a good society follows these good virtues: compassion, mercy, kindness, long-suffering, humility, and peacemaking. These are the hallmarks. These are the foundations of a good society. And if those who are in power, if those who have been placed in religious or social or political positions to drive society in that direction, if they're not cutting the mustard, if they're not doing that, then they need to be removed, because eventually it will happen. People will only allow for suffering to go on for so long. It's just the nature of humanity. And for those of you who are history buffs, we see it time and time again. I can only speak to my American culture, really. Although I've engaged with and traveled quite a bit to different cultures, my father being a missionary and spending as a family time in the Philippines, Singapore, Malaysia, and we in this country in particular have had a pretty substantial benefit in all the things that we really have had in luxury. All of the things that we have taken for granted that the rest of the world, a great portion of it, have not had. They have been suffering. And it's in those moments when we forget to start considering the suffering of others. It's in those moments when we become turned into ourselves and full of our own ambitions that we begin to neglect those who really need our help. Because in the end, we never know if we're going to be the ones suffering. And so that's why we have a society that cares for those who suffer. I do hope that I can send some message of encouragement to you. There's a lot of craziness happening politically. I know it, you know it. We're tired of it. I mean, I would imagine, I know I am. A lot of my friends are, my family are. I want to encourage you, regardless of those people who seem to be only tearing us down and dividing us, to take hope, to have courage, that in the end we can still have a society that is based in peace, that is concerned for the suffering of the least of us, and that can fashion peace and not violence as the answer to solving our problems. Thank you again for joining me today. I would love it if you would put your comments or suggestions in the comments below this video. I really appreciate that. And I know other people really appreciate it too. It really helps to spur conversation on, and that's always a positive thing. So until tomorrow, live at noon, when we see each other again, I want you to know that I love you. And I hope you choose to love yourself. It really is the only love that we have any control over in this world. And now I invite you to join me as we go about the rest of our day, loving our neighbors the same way. Thank you.